we're going to find out that supply is almost a mirror image of demand. But the key thing to remember between supply and demand is that demand shows a relationship between the amount that buyers are willing to purchase at a series of alternate prices. As we dive into supply, we're going to see that it says almost the exact same thing with one key difference. Supply discusses the amount that producers are willing to offer at a series of alternate prices. So let's go ahead and dive into supply real quick. So the definition for supply is the quantities of a good or service that sellers or producers are willing to offer at a series of alternate prices given a specific market and a specific time, ceteris paribus. Well, if we compare this definition to the demand definition, it's almost identical. And the only key difference is in supply, we talk about quantities of good that a seller is willing to offer, versus in demand, we talk about how much of buyers are willing to purchase. So if you can understand the concept of demand, you can understand the concept of supply. Just keep in mind that supply deals with producers, demand deals with buyers. So this supply is the quantities of a good that suppliers are willing to offer at a series of alternate prices. So that is a relationship. Just as demand was a relationship between price and quantity, supply is also a relationship between price and quantity. It shows that relationship of how much are consumers willing to, as producers are willing to make or offer at a series of alternate prices. It's showing that willingness aspect, and it's showing that it is a relationship. And then if we get into quantity supplied again is a mirror image of quantity demanded, only now we're talking about suppliers or producers. Quantity supplied is how much is a seller willing to offer at a single specific price. How much is this particular farmer going to produce this year if corn prices are, say, X amount? Are they going to produce more or less than last year? Are they going to produce the same? Or is the prices now high enough that they're going to produce more corn and, say, less of another crop? Or something to that nature. So, the quantity supplied is how much is a producer willing to offer at a single specific price. Whereas supply is a relationship between price and quantity, showing a series of alternate prices and a series of quantities. So just as with demand, we also have this supply schedule. So the supply schedule shows this series of alternate prices and the amount that's going to be produced at those alternate prices. So if we look at this whole table, that is a supply schedule. It shows that supply relationship. How much is going to be made at what price, showing that relationship. But as we look at each individual row, we look at this quantity supplied. So each one of these numbers, individual numbers, is that quantity that's being supplied. What that means is, at a price of $1, at a single specific price of $1, the quantity that's going to be supplied, or the quantity supplied, is half a unit. Whereas if the price is $2, one single specific price, that quantity is going to be 6.5 units. But as we look at the whole table, we see that relationship that's going on, a relationship between price and quantity. Now we also can develop a supply curve based on this supply schedule. So just as with the demands curve, we're going to take the supply schedule and put it onto a graph. So that way it's visually appealing. So that way we can take one quick look at it and get information out of it rather than trying to read a whole bunch of numbers off of the table. So just as with the demand curve, we're going to look at each individual point. So at a price of $1, we're going to produce half a unit. So on the supply curve graph, we have price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. So if we look at it and we say we have a price of $1, which is right here, we're going to produce a half a unit. Whereas if the price increases to $1.50, we're going to produce 3 units. So if we look right here at a price of $1.50, we're producing 3 units. At a price of $2, we are going to actually produce 6.5 units. So at a price of $2, we produce 6.5 units. At a price of $2.50, we produce 11 units. So at 2.5, we produce 11 units. So essentially, a supply curve is just taking this supply schedule and putting it onto a graph. So a couple things to note off of a supply curve is that it has this upward sloping trend. It is upward sloping as we compare that to the demand curve, which is downward sloping. The reason that this is upward sloping is because it has a positive relationship between price and quantity. As prices increase, the quantity that you're going to offer will also increase. Now, does that make sense? Well, think about it from a producer's standpoint. If prices are real high, are you going to produce more or less of that crop? Typically, you produce more. If prices are real low, are you going to produce more or less of that crop? Well, you're probably going to produce less. And how that works out is, let's say you can produce two different crops. You can produce corn or cotton. If cotton prices are real high, you're actually going to take corn production, or land out of corn production and plant more corn. So let's say prices on this particular year are in such a way where corn profits and cotton profits are roughly equal. If they're roughly equal, you're going to plant half your land in corn, half your land in cotton. But let's say, for example, corn prices just skyrocket to the point where the profit off of corn is now double what it would be off of cotton. It would make sense to pull land out of cotton and place it into corn production because that's a higher profitable deal. Well, it's more profitable probably because market price went up. So as prices increase, you're going to produce more of that good. There's more of an incentive to produce that good. And we see this time and time again. So it has this positive relationship because as prices increase, you're going to produce more of that good, which is what it says right here. You're going to increase the quantity that you're going to supply as prices increase. So as we get done here, just remember a couple things. Demand is a relationship between price and quantity, dealing with how much buyers are willing to purchase. Whereas quantity demanded shows how much they are willing to buy at a single specific price. Over here we talk about supply. And supply is the amount that producers are willing to offer at a series of alternate prices. So then again, it's that relationship between price and quantity and how much producers are willing to offer. Quantity supplied is how much a producer is willing to offer at a single specific price. And from there, we develop our demand schedule, our supply schedule, and basically all a graph is, all of a supply curve or a demand curve, is a visual representation of these schedules. And the last thing to remember is that demand curve is downward sloping, meaning as prices increase, the amount that people are willing to buy falls, and the supply curve is upward sloping, meaning as prices increase, the amount that producers are willing to sell or willing to offer will actually increase.